Well, welcome everybody to the Social World podcast. Today we're going to talk with David Jones, who's the National Chair of the Association of Independent Local Safeguarding Children Boards, and whose the association is the one that I belong to, chairing a couple of boards, but also is the membership board, if you like, for 140 plus boards up and down the country, and so is a very crucial and pivotal association when it comes to representation and a voice for the boards. Welcome, David.
Hello, David. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Now, we're actually talking to you at a fairly crucial time. Essentially because at the moment what we've got is we have a national review of children's safeguarding boards that David Cameron stimulated very recently, and who have a very, very short time span to report back. Alan Wood, the previous president of Directors of Children's Services, has actually been tasked with the job of doing the review, and meetings are beginning to be planned. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how I understand it, David. Yep.
Now, the aim of this is I'm reading now here from it, but to undertake a fundamental review of the role and the function of local safeguarding children boards within the context of local strategic multi-agency working, including, and these are two areas that we definitely know are going to be under a spotlight, the child death review process and consideration of how the intended centralisation of serious case reviews will work effectively at local level. That's the aim as published of the review. So far, we don't know a huge amount. I get that, David, but what's the association been hearing so far, and what are your first thoughts about this?
Well, we know that there have been discussions in a number of places in government. There's a Secretary of State-led ministerial task force that was set up last June by the Prime Minister following the CSE summit, for example. So there are discussions in government, but there are also discussions going on in different areas around ways of coordinating safeguarding. There have been some discussions in Birmingham and the West Midlands. Some of this is linked with the regionalisation and devolution debates that are going on in England.
Yeah.
So there are also discussions in Greater Manchester, no doubt in Merseyside to some extent. And there are different discussions between big counties and their cities around the resourcing of safeguarding in the very difficult climate that all agencies are finding themselves in. So there's been a lot of talk, and I think it's interesting that there's now been a formal review launched. It was announced on the 14th of December. We're now almost a month later. Of course, we've had Christmas in between, and we were originally told that the first draft of the process review would be completed mid-February. So that's in another month. That's an incredibly tight timetable.
Instant.
So we'll see how that plays out. Government tends to make these announcements, and one gets used to them drifting, and that isn't to be critical. Obviously, there's enthusiasm, and then that has to be tempered by realism of what's involved. It is such an important review because it refers in the terms of reference to fundamental review. And in a way, this is almost the first time that everybody is being encouraged to unpack what the safeguarding system is all about. The first time since almost the 1980 guidance, and you could almost go back to the 1970 battered baby syndrome guidance, which is where all this string of guidance around child protection dates from. So this is a pivotal moment. It really is significant. And I think that you could say, has this been stimulated by concerns that the system isn't working, that there have been the concerns about child sexual exploitation? There have been a constant drip of serious case reviews. It's often said that all these serious case reviews, SCRs, have the same findings. They all focus on poor communication, for example. And some people say, do people never learn? But on the other hand, there's also evidence of learning going on. But particularly at the moment, we're seeing a very significant increase in the number of children who are being referred into the child protection system because of concerns about their welfare at home. So there's all of those pressures. But also, we've learnt a lot more about how the systems work. And there are 20 authorities that have so far, 20 boards which have so far been rated as good by Ofsted. We haven't had any outstanding yet, which is disappointing. There's a huge amount of knowledge. And when you look at it internationally, David, the knowledge about child protection and the multi-agency systems that are necessary to keep children safe is as well developed in this country as anywhere else. So there's a lot of knowledge to feed into the review, as well as these concerns about the apparent problems that are so widely reported.
Yeah. Well, let's just take it bit by bit. I mean, I can't be totally impartial about this because I've got clear views about what I think from my own experience of chairing two safeguarding boards should be. But just to start with, the areas that we think, you mentioned serious case reviews. And you mentioned the fact that, and it looks very likely that the drive is to centralise them. In other words, to again find something within our practice that needs centralisation, and that will bring with it, I believe, challenges as well as possible improvements. Would you not agree with that?
Well, we're assured that there is not a model in the drawer which has been pulled out for what this means. So every option is on the table, and that could be anything from keeping the current arrangements but having more active scrutiny, or perhaps the reviewers being appointed centrally, through to a whole system like inspection, which is indeed, you could say, even with Ofsted driving it or an inspectorate driving it, of teams or individuals that descend out of the ether to review things and go away and write reports and so on. And there's a wide range of opportunities. I think that we can approach this positively, in the sense of that we know that serious case reviews are about learning. They obviously have a function of accountability, but their primary purpose is about learning. And we know that we, as a whole system, that's police, health, social care, education, we need to demonstrate better that there is learning from serious case reviews. I think there is locally, but I don't think that we draw those lessons together nationally as strongly as we should. So there's a lot of learning and a lot of knowledge around about how this might work, and we are looking forward to consultations with the department and to some extent with Alan Wood about how this might work, although I understand the terms of reference say that he will not be focusing on the structures of the centralisation, but he would be looking at the implications of that for local boards.
The other thing then that has been specific so far is the talk about the child death overview panels.
Yeah.
Now, what's your understanding, if you have any inclination at this stage, of what the aim is there?
Well, we've had less discussion about that so far, but it is really important. Let's remember where it came from. It arose from concerns, I think, in Bristol and in one or two other places where there had been a significant number of deaths of children in surgery with similar conditions, and nobody had been able to identify that pattern. And therefore it was said that there needed to be some structure locally that looked at all deaths of children. These are not only child abuse deaths, but they're all deaths of children, and look to see if there are any local patterns. And they've been going for a while. Most boards, areas running CDOPS child death overview panels, the numbers involved are really quite small in any one locality. So it's difficult to draw conclusions from statistical trends. Indeed, there's not enough numbers in many places to enable you to do that. So it's important that we bring this information together regionally and nationally, and that's only now just beginning to happen. But there is a debate, I guess. Are CDOPs in the right place? Are they located properly with safeguarding boards, given that most of the child deaths that are looked at are about children with congenital disabilities that are born with those disabilities and die soon after. There are a number, thankfully few, accidents, road accidents, and of course there are the occasional suicides, and these sorts of things. So it's important that we pull that information together nationally. Where else might that sit? Well, I guess it's possible that child death overview panels could sit within the health and wellbeing board structure rather than with the safeguarding children boards. But I think some of the CDOPs are just beginning to produce evidence, and we're just beginning the Department of Health has commissioned some research and to advise on how we develop a national overview of child deaths. And it would be a pity to change that or move it in a way that lost that learning. But we have to see where the debate goes.
Yes, I mean, people do forget the complexity of it sometimes. I mean, the issues where abuse is a factor is not insignificant sometimes, or the numbers are not insignificant. In fact, you could argue, for example, that young people's suicide, which is, let's all, by far and away the greatest cause of death of young people in this country, is suicide. And in effect, I think it was something like 700 last year. I mean, and that's something that we still have an awful lot of learning on how to put a better structure in place to support people who are going down that path. But the other side of it for me, and I wonder what your thoughts are about this, is in the name of the board itself, local safeguarding children boards, and the idea that information and wisdom about localities lie in that locality, and the threats to that are not within the gift of necessarily of the agencies operating there. For example, we all know that with the huge public service cuts that have had to happen, relationships have been fractured between agencies because posts don't exist anymore in many cases, and people who normally spoke to other people about child abuse are disappearing, and so it's strangers now who are trying to take up the reins if they have the time and the ability to do so. And so it's not just within the gift of the agencies themselves to repair some of the kind of communication problems. Would you agree with that?
I think we know what makes for effective safeguarding systems. It's a constant sense of inquiry and inquisitiveness, if you like, about circumstances of children and families, and when children present with difficult behaviour, changed circumstances, to think, why is it that has happened? So that's really important. But as important, as you were saying, David, is the trusting relationships between professionals, so that people know that they can have an honest conversation, that they can raise concerns, test them out with people without feeling that this is going to get out of control, or that the information will be used in the wrong way, and that you have some sense of predictability about what happens. Then people feel safe. We know that staff stay in localities and continue with child protection work when they feel well supported and safe in their work, and that happens when there are good supportive supervisory arrangements, where staff can raise concerns freely, and where that can happen on a multi-agency basis. And a lot of that, as you say, is being disrupted at the moment, which is why it makes it such a dangerous time for safeguarding, and why it's such a dangerous time for children.
I think that the other
structures don't provide safety. people
No,
provide safety, and
exactly.
we have
Yeah.
to get the structures in place to help people to do that.
I was going just to sort of broaden that a bit because I totally understand and agree what you're saying. We all know that most child abuse takes place within the family home, and it's parents and carers, unfortunately, who either deliberately or through lack of education or lack of information or lack of ability actually neglect children, whatever. But education is the crucial issue, and the
Yep.
Safeguarding Board's role in educating the community and informing the community and supporting the community and training the community is, to my mind, vital. It shouldn't and couldn't fall all on one agency to provide this. And so the idea of a coordinated shop window, if you want to put it crudely, I think is essential. And that's where I worry so much if centralization takes place and it all becomes amorphous, and away from a place and a locality that people understand.
Yes, and the challenge in that, as it relates to what we were just discussing, how you can sustain that sense of locality when there are so many changes going on. And as far as schools are concerned, I think all safeguarding boards are struggling to form relationships with schools in the new, much more diffuse and fragmented structure. One might more positively say devolved or structure, but whereas 10, 15 years ago, the local authority was able to coordinate schools and, at least in theory, bring some sort of consistency to how schools would respond to child protection. This is now much more individualistic, much more depends on the local school. And of course, teachers are saying that they are now finding that they're having to provide far more support for children who they see as vulnerable, that as early health services are being closed down, children's centres, in many places, the early help, the early support to families is evaporating. Although health visitors are still there and they provide an important function, but we're seeing all sorts of things happening, and I think that can only accelerate. How do we provide that support? And it's going to fall to schools, and schools are very ambivalent about that. Some are very committed. We know that there are teachers who use their own money to provide food for children, clothing for some of them. And they're very worried. Others say that that's not the school's function, that the school's job is to get kids to pass examinations and to develop their learning, and others should be there to provide the social support. But the reality is, in the next 10 years, there will be limited other people to provide that support. So engaging schools in new ways to understand this agenda is, I think, one of the biggest challenges for safeguarding boards, and that applies whether it's local or regional or national.
Totally.
In the end, that again comes back to relationships, and they have to be local. But it's perhaps worth thinking, what are some of the concerns and what are some of the changes for boards, David? And I think if we look back to the 1980 guidance and then working together, which flowed from that, interestingly, I was involved through the British Association of Social Workers in work on the 1980 guidance. BASWA published the Central Child Abuse Register, which a working group I chaired in 1978. And that led into the first guidance called the Central Child Abuse Register, issued by Department of Health and Social Security in 1980. But the first focus was on coordination, bringing people together, getting agreed ways between the different agencies, police, social services as it then was, education, to approach investigations and manage cases, and to provide training to stimulate that multi-professional partnership. And then the serious case review function was added a bit later on. And always in there, but rarely significant, was monitoring the effectiveness of what was happening. But in the last 5 years, or possibly the last 10 years, that function of monitoring the effectiveness has become the most important function for safeguarding boards. And it begs all sorts of questions, because the literature about how you monitor multi-agency working and effectiveness is very limited. We're all of us having to create ways of doing that monitoring, which of course is all, like inspection, is a mixture of using data, using qualitative indicators like case audits, like serious case reviews, like interviews with staff and so forth, and putting that together. And we know that boards are very variable, and that agencies are very variable in how able they are to evaluate how effective their safeguarding function is. So one of the debates is, in this review, it's still important to have procedures, it's still important to have training, but it's equally important to have evaluation and effectiveness. And who's best placed to do that evaluation? Especially when you have small LSCBs with small unitary authorities, do they have the resources, the capacity, the analytical capability to do that evaluation? Or should that be done at another level? And that brings us right back to something that you said earlier on, that these systems work effectively when they are close to the practice, when they can see the reality of what teachers, social workers, police officers, health visitors, midwives are doing. So you can't be too far away, but you have to be sufficiently distant to enable you to have some objectivity about what's going on.
No, totally understand.
How do we strike that balance is one of the big challenges for this review, I think.
I totally understand the value of having a robust quality assurance function within the board, because it also leads on to evidencing challenge to the different agencies, which is part of the board function.
Exactly.
And I think it cannot be in any way diluted, that function, because that, to my view, is the core of the board. It's support, it's education, it's training, but it's also challenge. Yeah. And that challenge has to be not only evidenced, but it also has to be understood about how it is, how you would ratchet it up. And there's no sanctions that the boards have, but they do have quite a bit of influence and quite a bit of opportunity to actually pull together the, if you like, the partnership side of things, which is the chair's role as I see it. Is that fair?
Yeah, and they do have a fairly new power to require people to provide information, but they don't have any sanctions if people don't. But and that's one of the things that people are discussing. See, there's people sometimes think, when I say people, I suppose I mean politicians, sometimes civil servants, sometimes the public, think that the Safeguarding Board is an independent structure. But actually it isn't, and it wasn't set up to be an independent structure. It is the partners in a local area coming together to ensure that they coordinate and cooperate effectively, and they have a statutory duty to do that, and to challenge each other about the effectiveness of services. But we know that in some places that works very well, and in some places the challenge has not happened at all. And so the question is, for this review, how can we make sure that challenge does happen, and how can we identify more quickly when problems are emerging, when problems are there, when children are not being listened to properly, when staff are silenced when they have concerns about the quality of practice. All of these things we have seen in individual case examples over recent months. How can we make sure that there's a quicker response when those problems are developing, and what powers are necessary for that, and can that be delivered through a strengthened LSCB, and what about the role of the chair in that, or should it be in some other structure? And there are various things people talk about, but health and wellbeing boards, they're equally local. There's the police and crime commissioners structure, which is a bit more removed, but clearly linked closely into the criminal justice system, and a lot of child protection is not about criminal justice, but of course that is an important element within it. So is there some other structure, or as is being explored in Birmingham and West Midlands, should a consortium of local authorities set up an independent arm's length body to provide that challenge across a number of authorities? But how does that work, and what resource does it require? And have people got the money to invest in that when at the moment we're seeing frontline services being really under pressure?
Precisely.
So
David,
there are no simple answers.
No,
Big
David,
challenges.
So many questions, but the important thing now, because we're going to have to pull this to an end at the moment, but the important thing now is that you've very articulately laid the landscape. And I think for this review and for the issues behind it, and what I'd like to invite you to do is to come back on the program in a few weeks' time, if you would, and actually kind of let's see what's happening then. Let's see when more things are on the table, when more of the issues have been actually discussed further. Would you be prepared to do that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. This is too important for children of this country, because in the end, it isn't just about the few children who are abused, but it's about the sort of society we want to create and the sort of support systems we want to create for children and for their parents. And so I hope that this will stimulate a wide discussion.
Well, the 55,000 children who each day are subject of child protection plans, and that's only the ones that have been identified, rely so heavily on an efficient and an effective multi-agency cooperative system that whatever comes out of this review has to be robust and has to be effective. I mean, we know that from both of us having years and years and years involved in the system, and having seen all the things we've seen.
And having seen that compared internationally, we actually do reasonably well on those fronts, but that's not to be complacent. But perhaps I could just finish with this message, David, that these are uncertain times, and we know that uncertainty creates risk for children. So it is really important, a really important message to safeguarding boards and those people who work with them, that we have to sustain the current systems, the current arrangements, and be fully committed to making those work until we know how they're going to change, if indeed they will change. And it's in children's interest that we don't take our eye off the importance of multi-agency cooperation and working effectively together to protect children, because that's, of course, what all of us want to see, children look happy and thriving.
Pleasure talking to you, David. Thanks ever so much, and speak to you again very soon.
Thanks for asking.